Okay, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for coming to our session today. Maybe if we want to finish up conversations and kind of wind down, where everyone could grab a seat. We got some seats up at the front for those who are trickling in. Sorry, when you're late, you have to sit up front. So, thank you all for joining us today. I hope you guys had a good evening and you enjoyed yesterday's sessions. The session that you're in, if you're not aware of, is the What JA Wartime Incarceration Tells Us About Mass Deportation Today. So if this isn't what you want to listen to, you're in the wrong room. Yeah, no. But anyways, so we are blessed to have Frank Abe here to speak with us today. Frank is a lead author of the graphic novel We Hereby Refuse, Japanese American Resistance to Wartime Incarceration. He's a finalist in creative nonfiction for the Washington State Book Award and co-editor with Floyd Chung of the new Penguin classic anthology, The Literature of Japanese American Incarceration. He received an American Book Award as co-editor of John Okada, The Life and Rediscovered Work of the Author of No No Boy, and wrote and directed the award-winning PBS documentary called Conscious in the Constitution. He is currently developing a new stage God, I can't speak. It's been a long day, sorry. And it's only 9 o'clock. I know. He's currently developing a new stage adaptation of Okada's No No Boy, and he blogs at resistors.com. So please welcome Frank to the stage. Sorry, that was really short.
Thank you very much. Wow, great. Thank you all for coming out this morning. Maybe put this, the volume's fine. Okay. Also, want to recognize my co-editor of John Okada, Greg Robinson. He stepped away though, didn't he, Greg? Yeah. Okay. When we discussed my speaking here this morning with Chizu and Kimiko, like in February, Greg, I want to acknowledge Greg as my co-editor of the book on John Okada. So thanks, John. Thanks, Greg. The subject of what I would speak about today came up, and I just threw a placeholder out there, what wartime incarceration means for, or what Tule Lake means for mass incarceration or mass deportation today. And not knowing how, this is like right after the inauguration, and not knowing how things were going to turn out, we had an idea, even after January, February, of what would happen. But I had no idea it would turn this dark. I was asked to speak at Wellesley. Elena Creef asked me to speak at Wellesley in April, and I'm sorry, excuse me. I'll stand over here. When I spoke at Wellesley, their art director came up with this great graphic, and I thought, poster artwork, and I thought, well, that's really it. This is my talk. This says it all. A 21st century jetliner on the tarmac, ready to forcibly remove these little Japanese Americans from 1942 from our graphic novel there in the corner, clutching their suitcases and duffel bags, holding only what they could carry, and pinned with family number tags. And this juxtaposition, I think, perfectly captures the connection between World War II incarceration and the kidnapping and human trafficking of legal residents and immigrants today, literally today. So let me summarize first what's in the graphic novel. And I'm sorry that our book was not on sale yesterday. The publisher just reprinted a new 5th printing. So it's now in like 17,000 copies in print right now. And thank you. Oh, thank you. Yeah, thank you, Greg. Cheerleader there. Can you hear me okay, Eric, back there? So maybe if you just boost the volume on the... Oh, thank you. Oh, okay, thank you. I didn't want to assault you with the decibels this morning. Our graphic novel does follow 3 young people who embody the 3 distinct expressions of resistance to their wartime incarceration. Jim Akutsu of Seattle refuses to be drafted into the army out of camp at Minidoka, not until his rights are first restored as a citizen. Hiroshi Kashiwagi of Sacramento, who refuses government pressure to sign a loyalty oath at Tule Lake. And Mitsuya Endo, also of Sacramento, refuses a chance to leave the camp at Topaz so that her case can reach the U.S. Supreme Court. And I am struck that I'm here this weekend with several other colleagues that the subject of camp resistance, I just want to reflect, is not something that we talked about in our community as recently as 25 years ago. It was still a subject considered distasteful in polite society. Didn't bring it up in conversation. But around the year 1999-2000, Eric Muller and Chizu Omori and Emiko Omori and myself came out with books and films that centered the story of camp resistance, and it was considered quite daring at the time, right, Eric? I mean, it was something that was still viewed with a little bit of distaste by some of the people in the community. But now a new generation has come up, and now we're talking about it freely and studying it. So I'm very pleased about that. So I want to, ever since the inauguration, kind of revisit these stories that I wrote in 2021 during the pandemic, and through the lens of today. And I was kind of shocked at how prescient some things were in the graphic novel, and how they kind of look differently today. For example, this year we've all learned a new term, Alien Enemies Act, invoked by the president as his basis for mass deportations. This statute, enacted in 1798, applies only to aliens of countries with which we're in a declared war. And as Eric so aptly described yesterday, we're not at war with Venezuela today, right? It's not like the redcoats invading New England back in the 1700s. But in 1941, we were at war with Japan, which had bombed ships at Pearl Harbor. So the Alien Enemies Act was the basis for the selective arrest and detention of 5,500 Japanese community leaders here on the West Coast. Our grandfathers who I think, importantly, would have applied for naturalized U.S. citizenship if the statutes at the time had not denied them a pathway to citizenship for anyone of Asian ancestry. Alien Enemies Act also provided for the arrest and internment of thousands of German aliens and hundreds of Italian aliens singled out for pro-Axis activities. So that law was not based on ancestry alone. In the graphic novel, Jim comes home from football practice to find the FBI taking away his father. FBI seizes an innocent Japanese language magazine on the list of subversive media as evidence of subversion. Equivalent today of demanding we open our phones so they can search through our emails and social media to see what we're reading and thinking. But they take away Jim Akutsu's father to the DOJ alien internment camp at Fort Missoula, Montana. Jim's father is just a cobbler. He's not a business leader or a Buddhist priest like those arrested before him. And for 2 years, Jim's father is shuttled from one Justice Department camp to another, and Jim's mother loses track of where he is. She receives these letters from North Dakota and New Mexico, Louisiana, and Jim's mother, now Akutsu, writes letter after desperate letter begging for his release. And I think what's notable is that Jim's father and the other Issei who were arrested under the Alien Enemies Act did receive individual hearings to determine individual loyalties in courtrooms like this one that was restored at Fort Missoula. These alien enemy hearing boards were comprised of 3 civic leaders from the town of Missoula, white people, white men, who would question the attorneys on their loyalties and issue specific findings. Most were found, of course, insufficiently dangerous to justify their continued detention and paroled back to their families in camp. So the Alien Enemies Act was the basis for the arrest of Jim Akutsu, but not the basis for the mass exclusion, right, that included Jim and other American citizens. The 125,000 people of Japanese ancestry in the War Relocation Authority camps got no hearings, no trials, no due process. That authority came with the stroke of the president's pen on an executive order. Executive orders, again, a vehicle we're now very familiar with today in the headlines. This one, numbered 9066. The ones being signed now are numbered in the 14,000s. What 9066 did was authorize the military, in the name of national security, to be able to designate areas from which it could exclude those it considered a threat. And the order does not mention any group by name, but of course everyone understood what it meant. Now, and I want to thank Eric Muller for this graphic. The Army had no evidence at the time, as Eric said yesterday, of espionage or sabotage by Japanese Americans. And in fact, no such acts occurred, as you know. So the general in charge of the Western Defense Command argues the very fact that no sabotage has taken place to date is a disturbing and confirming indication that such action will be taken. And I really got to thank Eric for pointing out this line in a current government declaration filed March 17th in a case against the alleged Tren Aragua Venezuelan gang members, whatever, in which the government presents no evidence. And it says, while it's true that many of the TDA members removed under the Alien Enemy Act do not have criminal records, the lack of specific information about each individual actually highlights the risk they pose. So some things never change. Okay. In the graphic novel, we show you also the bright young adjutant general who comes up with a plan for mass exclusion that can pass, in their view, constitutional muster. Carl Van Dutzen said, let's prescribe 108 military zones from which we can exclude all people who we designate, and then license back only those we deem safe to stay, safe to us. And this would get us around any messy constitutional issues around citizenship or race. So to carry out the executive order from the president, the Army nails these posters to telephone poles up and down the West Coast that finally say the quiet part out loud. Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry. Today, we see the government trampling these fine lines between citizens, visa holders, green card holders, and the undocumented. These posters, interestingly, also blurred those distinctions. In true Orwellian fashion, the exclusion order in the fine print says it applies to what it calls aliens and to non-aliens. And Jim Akutsus and others stood there and, for the first time, wondered, well, what's a non-alien? And then he said, they mean a U.S. citizen. They mean me. And that was, I think, for many, the moment when they realized this had crossed the line and it finally had come to them. Because Jim's generation, the Nisei generation, figured that their parents as immigrants might get removed because they're, of course, not citizens under the law, but not them because they're citizens. So here, in an instant, the line was crossed and the protections of birthright citizenship went out the window. So today, the government is arresting legal permanent residents like Mahmoud Khalil, who exercised his free speech rights at Columbia University against genocide in Gaza. He had been detained in the Louisiana jail for nearly 4 months. On April 17th, Khalil sent a letter from jail in which he wrote, I pick up my copy of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I feel ashamed to compare my conditions to Nazi detention to Nazi concentration camps, yet some aspects of Frankl's experience resonate, not knowing what fate awaits me, seeing resignation and defeat in my fellow detainees. And then he writes, my lawyers have mentioned that a case called Endo might bear on my own. Days later, in my research at a law library, I uncovered the human story behind the legal abstraction. Mitsuya Endo, a Japanese-American woman incarcerated during World War II, challenged her captors and brought her case to the Supreme Court. Her victory helped secure the release of thousands of others. So I saw that and I thought, wow, could Khalil have picked up a copy of our graphic novel, because it is still the only book to illustrate the human story, the personal story, behind the legal abstraction of Endo, a name in a court brief, a court filing. Maybe he found it in a law library in this Louisiana jail. And I thought, maybe I should send one to him as a courtesy. But then, and this is like April, I thought, yeah, I know they opened his mail in jail. Do I want to put my name right in front of them, in front of ICE, my name and address, sending this book to him? So these are considerations. And we had just talked at the AAAS conference with our friends there about we have professors in this room who are on watch lists. And in Boston, we discussed strategies for how we defend each other in the event that we hear that so-and-so has been picked up. And so this is starting to happen. I mean, we are starting to feel the noose tighten. I joked about this with Eric last night, and he says, well, he thinks that we're still far down the list of those that the FBI will pick up first, but we're still writers and activists in the JA community. I think we're still out there. We're still our names are out there. There's no point in my scrubbing my social media because it's too late. It's already been archived. So this raises the question we can discuss later: how visible do we want to be at a moment when we know we're being surveilled and a crackdown on professors, education, and writers is coming? In any event, in the graphic novel, we show you how Mitsuya Endo was, who she was, a key punch operator in Sacramento for the state of California, a government employee. After Pearl Harbor, the state goes through its lists of employees and suspends all employees with a Japanese surname. And of course, they do this by hand, right? Today, they would use AI to assist them in going through their lists. And these letters, the letter that Mitsuya got was filled with wild accusations of treachery and disloyalty, pulled from the air, really, that she was a member of Japanese organizations violently opposed to the democratic form of government, etc. So, not unlike the label of terrorist and MS-13 gangster that the president attaches to Kilmar Abrego Garcia, the man, right, who was arrested by mistake and sent to El Salvador, and who was just brought back and charged with transporting gang terrorists. So you see the same kinds of wild and baseless accusations being made today were made back then against our parents and grandparents. Endo joins a group of 63 Nisei state employees who organized to contest their termination, and they hire an attorney named James Purcell of San Francisco. In the middle of the case, however, the Army issues its exclusion orders finally, and Endo is upset that she is denied due process. It's just not fair. We never got our day in court. I know, dear. And so she recognizes in her gut the meaning of what due process means. She had no chance to contest her exclusion as an individual. What's key here is how important it is for one person to stand up and say, this is wrong. In San Francisco, James Purcell is that person. He becomes outraged by the mass exclusion and detention as a matter of as a rule of law. He had a client who was sent to Tanforan. He visited them at Tanforan, was shocked by the horse stalls and manure on the walls, etc. And so I think we need more private attorneys like him. And thankfully we have them in people like Carl Takei, Eric Muller, who filed briefs rebutting the claims of invasion under the Alien Enemies Act. And that's pending now in the courts, I guess. And this is also why the current president is issuing executive orders targeting attorneys like James Purcell at private law firms today, firms like Perkins Coie, to silence them and extort free legal services for his personal use. James Purcell decides to bring a federal petition for habeas corpus, which Khalil mentioned, produce the body to challenge the legality of one's detention or imprisonment, to seek relief from unlawful imprisonment, confinement. All matters of law that Mahmoud Khalil faces now. I should update that. I mean, it's hard to keep up with these things, but as you know, Mahmoud Khalil was released from Louisiana jail on Friday. Well, today's Sunday, right? So released Friday, flown back Saturday, yesterday, reunited with his wife and newborn child, who he had not seen because the child was born while he was in jail in Louisiana. Not unlike in the graphic novel, the story of George Kuratomi at Tule Lake, a leader of the negotiating committee, who was thrown into the stockade and was not allowed to see his daughter, Yuri Kuratomi Owens of San Diego, until he was released after 8 months in the Tule Lake stockade. And his wife, Singer Terada, would go to the fence at Tule Lake at the stockade and hold up their daughter so that George Kurotome could see her while he was in the stockade. So just another parallel. Purcell goes shopping among his clients and lands on Endo as the one who checks all the boxes for him. Endo's reluctant at first. She's shy, of course. She's Nisei. You can find some better. What about Eureka? What about Ruby? She realizes, though, that the consequence of the moment is so important. She shakes hands to signal her agreement. And so that's her act of courage. Lawyers for the government, of course, know they're violating the principles of habeas corpus, just as they undoubtedly know today, are those lawyers for the DOJ. They know what they're doing. So Endo, of course, wants her freedom, but she knows the trick is that if she leaves Camp Topaz, it will render her habeas corpus case moot. So she can do what's best for herself or do what's the best for the good of all. And of course, she decides to do what's best for all. I am willing to go as far as I can on this case, is a quote from a letter she wrote to her attorney. For her, it means staying in camp for another full year at Topaz until her case finally reaches the U.S. Supreme Court, which rules the Roosevelt administration has no legal right to detain admittedly loyal U.S. citizens for an indeterminate amount of time. And this decision prompts the Army to revoke the West Coast exclusion zone, and the War Relocation Authority announces it will close the camps within 6 months to a year. And they actually do these, they put these statements out on a Sunday afternoon before the Supreme Court announces it on Monday in November of 44. The Roosevelt's team had gotten tipped off from one of the justices that the ruling was coming, so they wanted to get out in front of the news and said they announced this on a Sunday afternoon that that they were going to drop the case, and by revoking the exclusion zone. And here I might take a moment to kind of mourn the loss of a world in which the president actually obeys an order of the court. Because in this moment, as you know, we don't know if the executive branch of government will obey court rulings to return abducted immigrants. We're beginning to see a little bit of that this week. I mean, we're beginning to see some returns. Khalil was released Friday. So we may have avoided another constitutional standoff. Maybe not. We just don't know. But if the courts cannot enforce their rulings, many warn that is the death of democracy right there. So the story of Mitsuya Endo tells us a lot about the question of due process and the rule of law. So what about the other threats in the air today? The whole set of actions taken by Homeland Security and ICE to encourage legal residents to self-deport, to voluntarily leave this country on their own through the mass cancellation of student visas and other methods of intimidation. And so here's just one example of many, and this is from April, which was the Doge kids rifling through our Social Security data to mark individuals in the Social Security system as dead in an effort to pressure immigrants to self-deport because they have no means of support here, no means of income. And we've seen this pressure before, right after Pearl Harbor, with members of Congress eager to remove and deport the Yellow Peril. I cannot tell you how shocked I was last summer, as you were, no doubt, to see delegates of a major political party gleefully waving signs for mass deportation now. We've seen that before, too, in the story of Hiroshi Kashiwagi and the renunciation crisis at Tule Lake. As we've seen, there were no individual hearings in the mass exclusion incarceration. So a year after the removal, when the government realizes it now needs some way in January of 43 to sort the loyal from the disloyal on paper. They need some way to process, some way to administratively classify people. And a brilliant idea is we'll give them a questionnaire. In order to clear students for relocation to colleges outside of camp, or to take volunteers into the Army. They need some way to retroactively clear them on paper. And so the questionnaire asks, the questions, if you're willing to serve in the armed forces on combat duty, whether you swear allegiance to the U.S. and forswear any and all allegiance to Emperor Japan. nowadays, a paper questionnaire seems so 20th century. Now, all the government has to do is run an algorithm to search your internet history to determine your thoughts and trigger transfer of those deemed not loyal to the country to the high security segregation center at Tule Lake. Now, all during the war, members of Congress have been looking for some ways to strip American citizens, American-born Nisei, I should say, of their U.S. citizenship and deport everyone, Issei and Nisei, to Japan. And the Attorney General, Francis Biddle, keeps telling them you can't do that under the 14th Amendment, which guarantees birthright citizenship to anyone born on U.S. soil. But Biddle also suggests a way around the Constitution. And in July 44, Congress adopts the Denaturalization Act, which for the first time enables a U.S. citizen to voluntarily renounce their citizenship during times of war. And the beauty, if you will, of this idea is that why pass a law that will be overturned in court when you can get the angry, frustrated, and confused Nisei in camp to voluntarily surrender their citizenship? And Tule Lake, as Chizu's film, Emiko's film, so vividly showed yesterday, was one of the 10 regular concentration camps until the government converted it to a high security segregation prison. And that's what created the conditions for unrest at Tule Lake. 18,000 people pushed into the segregation center can see how this government has abandoned or turned against them. And anger, frustration, and isolation boil over into organization, these are the so-called pro-Japan fanatics at Tule Lake. And a meme kind of advanced by the Japanese American Citizens League at the time. And I won't go into it here, but in the graphic novel, we show how these groups, really are a product of the duress of mass imprisonment and segregation and abandonment. And it's in this environment that 7 of every 10 Nisei at Tule Lake, with only rumor and misinformation to guide them, walk into this trap and voluntarily surrender their U.S. citizenship. They act under duress from the government and coercion from gangs that the government knowingly allows to run wild. And this includes Hiroshi Kashiwagi. He caves to family pressure, as many did, but they all immediately regretted their decisions and desperately tried to withdraw it, but they can't. And there were 5,000 families who had arguments around a dinner table like this in 1944. Sharon Yamato's film, What Wayne Collins, One Fighting Irishman, tells you the whole story of how, one attorney, again, spent 20 years to restore the citizenship's rights of these 5,000 people. Great film. As one character in our graphic novel says, how convenient for the government to give us the chance to self-deport, and we walked right into this trap. And today, again, in countless homes across the nation, families are having anguished discussions over kitchen tables like that one about what to do about a canceled visa or a revoked green card or the loss of earned Social Security income, or just the pure hatred from the government against them right now, the cruelty that you all see. So I'm no expert on the current outrages or what to do about them. In this, I'm as much as an observer as you and other speakers this weekend. But what we can show you is how the events we cover in our books and films and graphic novels kind of anticipate the assaults on due process and civil liberties that we're seeing today. And in the case of our graphic novel, how 3 people refuse to submit to unjust, or illegal government edicts without a fight. I'm a former journalist myself. In journalism, we used to pride ourselves on writing the first draft of history. And I'm very disappointed. I can see my former colleagues in the daily media being overwhelmed by the blitzkrieg of assaults on so many fronts, and they're unable to understand and assess and sort and interpret the attacks on diversity, privacy rights, women's rights, Social Security, education, science, public health, the economy, and the very fabric of democracy. So they cover it like a horse race or whatever, I'm also a somewhat public historian, and as a historian, I can show you what happened before and how it lines up with today. And we saw what happened, the laydown strike at Tule Lake that Emiko so brilliantly kind of contextualized those photographs yesterday. I thought that was great. And of course, what's happening today. And this is another internet meme. I'm not sure where I grabbed it from, but it shows the military police at Tule Lake on top. And we're in the phase now of sending the military to California to act against American citizens on U.S. soil. I guess that's kind of calmed down now. So that's, we kind of dodged a little bullet there too. But we've seen this before, sending the National Guard to LA to act against American citizens. We saw that before with the use of soldiers to remove our families from the West Coast. So in closing, let me return to the question, what does the wartime incarceration tell us about mass deportation today? Simply this, that despite the values and ideals embodied in our laws and founding constitution, the fear of the other can drive public policy. No surprise there. It has before, and it's happening again now. By looking at what's happened before, we can, however, be guided by it and maybe get an idea of how we can respond today. That same fear of the other, resurfaces like clockwork whenever America feels itself threatened from abroad. In World War II after Pearl Harbor, in the 1980s, when the imports of cars and consumer electronics from Japan stoke alarms of an economic Pearl Harbor, culminating in the beating death of Vincent Chin by 2 Detroit auto workers. After 9/11, when the suicide bombing of the World Trade Center provokes the racial profiling of Muslims and Americans, and in fact, anyone who wears a turban. More recently, election of 2016 brings racial division and latent white nationalism to the very top of our government, with a ban on travel from majority Muslim nations, family separations, and the caging of asylum seekers from Latin America. During the pandemic, when the cries from an American president of China virus and Kung flu condones violence against Asian Americans, that continues to this day. And of course, now here we are today. And this image, again, crystallizes the current White House mechanism for mass deportation. So they got smart. They won't be repeating, at least it seems now, they won't be repeating the imagery from World War II of building camps in remote deserts and swamps with armed soldiers, rifles and bayonets, ordering the displaced people onto buses and trains. No, as this kind of so perfectly captures an early step in the 21st century is to offshore and outsource concentration camps, right? Away from the public eye, out of sight, out of mind. At first, and by that I mean the ancient times of February, it was in places that the U.S. owns, in places like Guantanamo in Cuba. In March and April, the plan was to kidnap people off the street with no hearings or due process and fly them to an industrialized prison in El Salvador, with our president urging the president of El Salvador to build 5 more like it, to take in what he calls the homegrown, meaning native citizens like you and me. His exact quote, of course, was, "Homegrowns are next." The homegrowns. You got to build about 5 more places. It's not big enough. But those numbers, March, April, apparently were not enough to meet arbitrary quotas for cruelty. So now, May, June, we're seeing the government raiding or laying in wait outside schools, hospitals, courtroom check-ins, churches, and workplaces. So this is again the slow progression we've seen just in the last 6 months. I want to add, we've got to keep our terms clear and stop calling these deportations. Be very clear, deporting is sending someone back after a fair hearing with due process to a country from which they came, where they will arrive a free person. What we're seeing now, of course, is kidnapping and human trafficking to a foreign torture prison or to privately run prisons here at home. So, what's next? I think one clue is in the billions being proposed in the tax bill now before Congress that would massively scale up ICE operations to fully implement that placard-waving promise of mass deportations now. Billions to ICE to add thousands of officers to arrest and jail more immigrants in all the major cities. Billions to private contractors to identify and locate targets, jail them in for-profit detention centers, and fast-track their deportations. We've heard the acting director of ICE famously quoted as saying he wants a deportation system that works like Amazon Prime, but for human beings. So these would be a return to hometown concentration camps, not in barracks with barbed wire like the Puyallup Assembly Center, but in private prisons run by private corporations. It's all about privatization, right? With no transparency, much like the Northwest Detention Center in Tacoma, which is operated by the GEO Group on behalf of ICE. And we've seen this before. In 1944, journalist James Omura testified to a congressional commission that was studying the potential mass exclusion, and he had this pointed question for them.
Has the Gestapo come to America? Have we not risen in righteous anger at Hitler's mistreatment of the Jews? Then is it not in Congress that citizen Americans of Japanese descent should be similarly mistreated and persecuted?
Yeah, I love James. I mean, he was ahead of his time. He told me that civil rights heroes aren't recognized for what they did until 50 years after their death, in his opinion. Fortunately, we got to recognize him while he's still alive. So let me close with these thoughts. The first is to keep the bigger picture in mind. Remember that this demonization of immigrants and minorities is, in the end, just a distraction for them. They stoke the basest fears of the population in order to distract us from the hidden goal, which could be to enact legislation to transfer another $2 trillion from the American middle class to the oligarchy. That's a classic page from the authoritarian playbook. And if so, it's our job to turn it back. Secondly, consider this simple but provocative question from novelist Viet Thanh Nguyen. If you ever wondered what would you have done during World War II when Japanese Americans were sent to concentration camps, now you know. That's what you're doing right now. But you're here in this conference talking about it, so that's your credit. Then let me read you from the last pages of We're Hereby Refuse, written in the before times of 4 years ago, but I think still holding up today. Hiroshi Kashiwagi, working as a librarian here in San Francisco, describing how he fought for 10 years to get back the citizenship he had renounced at Tule Lake. After 35 years, can you imagine my chagrin, my dismay, when I learned there was no law that required draft age Nisei to answer that loyalty questionnaire in camp? All those threats of prison and fines, all lies. I was angry all over again. At least I'm able to unburden myself with others who are cast out from our own community, even to this day. To be an American is a privilege I appreciate. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that America must unburden itself too. The government was wrong to single us out for exclusion based solely on our race. It was wrong then, and it would be wrong now. And whenever we see America turn against a people because of their race or their religion or their whatever, we won't just stand by. We won't just go along. I will speak up. I will see that every person gets a fair hearing. I will be the friend we didn't have when we needed one the most. It happened to us. We refuse to let it happen again. Thank you very much.
So, are you okay standing as we talk?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you so much, Frank, for that presentation. You kind of went through a lot, kind of set up the stage of how historically we as the government or whatever, or our government has done stuff to people, and we continue to do it today, right? One of the things that I was kind of like looking at, you had that picture of Bainbridge Island with the National Guard unit there. And I'm not sure if you all know, but the Bainbridge Islanders, when they were being forcibly removed, it's actually the New Jersey National Guard that came in to remove them. And some of the sites, like Minidoka, the military police was actually a National Guard unit from Michigan. And so I recently actually spoke over at Central Michigan University where the dean of the college asked me to make a connection because under his college, he has ROTC. And a lot of his students were actually asking, what do I do if the government asks me to do something that I don't agree with? And so it's a complicated thing because I can't tell them what to do, but it's like ultimately they have to think about if they want to still serve or not, because that's what we're asking our youth to do, things like that. And it's interesting because I feel like in the Japanese American community, we have this notion about military and how we kind of hold it up on a pedestal with the Nisei soldiers and whatnot, and how things have kind of degraded from that time to what it is now. And it's really complicated. But anyways, so one question that I at least have, because you kind of brought it up about Carl Bendetson, and then I don't know why, I was just thinking about it. I'm like, is our Carl Bendetson Stephen Miller? you know? So I don't know if you have any comments to that, of if you see similarities on.
That's probably a better analogy. I had in mind the Doge 25-year-old, Mr. Big Balls. Right? He's not that smart. But Stephen Miller is unfortunately very smart and strategically thinking. So that's probably a better comparison. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it's like, how can we, like, as citizens, like, kind of push back to hold, our government accountable in that aspect? But, in one aspect, it's like the mechanism of government, right? Where, the president could defy orders or whatnot, or create orders that could be constitutionally ambiguous. Like, as citizens, do you have any recommendations of what we potentially can do? And I don't know if maybe Eric or Greg has any comments on this as well, but.
Well, actually,
Yeah.
ask the Suda for Solidarity people.
Oh yeah,
That-
Sudo. Do we have any
that are
Sudo folks? I think I
question-
saw Barbara.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Aaron. Oh, I'm sorry. Stan. Who's that next to Aaron? Stan.
Well, essentially, what could like citizens do to kind of combat some of this stuff that we're observing? Because I know Sudo, you guys been doing a lot of like protesting and other aspects, but maybe people may not have like detention facilities nearby or anything. But is there any like opportunities or recommendations that if people want to be active to kind of push back against this, what are the options that they have?
Okay, well, thank you. Thanks a lot, Frank, for the presentation. First, I'd like to make a couple of observations. Oh, I have to be in the front. So one of the things we do in Seattle, and Barb can attest to this, is that we do observations of deportation flights that come into the King County Airport, the publicly funded, publicly owned airport within the city of Seattle city limits. From the detention center in Tacoma, they bring prisoners to the airport, put them on planes, and fly them away to other points where they will then be either transferred to another facility or deported somewhere. 3 takeaways. One is, it struck me that in 1942, they removed us on trains. In 2024, 25, they're removing us on planes. Second thing is corporate complicity. All of this is done by private corporations. The detention center is owned and run by Geo Group that Frank had mentioned. The flight service operator, the ones that fuel the planes and empty their garbage and block their wheels when they arrive and push the stairway up to the door. That's Signature Aviation, another private for-profit corporation. And then the plane itself is run by Global Crossings Airlines or Avelo Airlines or Eastern Air Express, all private for-profit charter and airlines. And they don't have a contract with ICE. So if you go ask Avelo Airlines, what kind of contract do you have with ICE? They'll say, we have no contract with ICE, because ICE hires another group called CSI Incorporated, who's a broker, and then they go write the contract for Avelo and Global and Eastern Air Express. So there's this kind of layers of plausible deniability, I think is what they call it, where you go to the corporation, they say, oh, we have no contracts with ICE, because they're dealing with a broker who then has a contract with ICE. So it's this evasion of responsibility. Third thing is that everybody, which is different than World War II, everybody who's on the bus or on the plane is in chains. The wrists are chained together. The wrists are then chained to their waist. They have shackles between their ankles. And we watch every week, sometimes several times a week, we observe the planes and we see these people in chains being taken from the bus and put on the plane, or being taken off the plane and put on a bus. And the other takeaway that struck me is that this is the largest mass transit program of people in chains since the end of the slave trade. And we really need to think about that as a country, as a society, as individuals. Are we okay with that? Can this really be happening in the United States? Is this constitutional? Is this legal? It's definitely not moral. And so what is our position going to be? So in Suited for Solidarity, we do things like we go protest at the detention center. We work with La Resistencia, this directly impacted group. They're all have either been under threat or have experienced within their family detention and deportation. And so we're working with them to try to shut that place down. We're working with them to do the observations with the ultimate goal of shutting down the whole ICE air operation of flying people around in chains and then deporting them. If you're within an area where you have access to a detention facility or an airport, in California it's Victorville and Bakersfield and San Diego, then you could try to start your own observation program. Or find some group that will. But wherever you are, you can write to your members of Congress who control the purse strings of Department of Homeland Security, meaning ICE and Border Patrol. You can raise a fuss. You can go out, 6 million people, 7 million people went out a few weeks ago. And if there's enough people out on the streets in peaceful protest, eventually, politicians will have to listen, even the Republican ones. And so we need to maintain the pressure and figure out new ways, creative ways, to put more pressure on the people who are able to make decisions that will stop all this shit. Excuse me. But, okay.
Thank you, Stan. I do want to start opening it up to the audience if you guys have any questions for Frank. I don't know.
Hey, excuse me. Hey, Frank. Thanks so much for your talk. It was, feels, of course, very timely for all of us. You, during your talk, had like a lot of parallels between what happened during JA incarceration versus what's happening now. I'm curious if you could share if there are any examples of kind of solidarity and resistance via solidarity of other groups before incarceration. You mentioned James Purcell being outraged. I'm curious if you would mind sharing other examples that you might know from your research about folks outside the JA community who were trying to advocate in some way during that time. And then, sorry, one other thing I wanted to just on a note about what folks could do. If you live in Alameda County, I would write down the number 510-241-4011. That's the Alameda County Immigration, Legal, and Education Partnership if you witness raids happening in Alameda County.
Read the number again.
Sorry, that number is 510-241-4011.
And who is that?
So that's the Alameda County Immigration, Legal, and Education Partnership.
And what do they do within that?
They do legal work. So when you see something happening, as far as ICE is concerned in the community, they're kind of the first response, local response that you would contact.
Excellent.
But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, well, you're welcome. Thank you. As for your first question about allies, I'd just simply refer you to Ken Mochizuki's graphic novel that succeeds mine in the same series from Chinese Press called Those Who Helped Us, drawn by Kiko Hughes. And Ken wrote a script about Father Tibisar in Seattle, who was a minister who moved to Minidoka, I think, to help the people there. And of course, someone mentioned the Quakers yesterday, American Friends Service Committee, very much involved with helping the evacuees with the removal and afterwards with assistance, family assistance, and resettlement aid after the war as well. So those are just two examples. But there are many examples of white allies in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Walt and Millie Woodward, the Bainbridge Island Review, right, Susan? They editorialized against the mass incarceration from their little newspaper on for an island west of Seattle, Bainbridge Island. So there are these isolated examples, but I think that the attorneys are the ones who had the real impact, obviously. Wayne Collins and James Purcell and others who came to our aid. Yeah. Yes. We did. That's the one. I couldn't remember the title. Yeah. What is the title?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay. She's a Seagull. Yeah. In Good Conscience. Okay. So that's another book that is recommended. Yeah. Oh, you're Franco Loden. How are you? Hi.
Fine, thank you.
we were Facebook friends, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. I recognize
Well,
your
that's
name.
because for the past almost 20 years, I've had this huge struggle teaching ethnic studies in the concentration camp class at Cal State East Bay, trying to get your film, Conscience and the Constitution, to be regularly available and accessible to my online students. So my question is, how can we stabilize a great film like yours, The History of Resistance, to be constantly available for free for my students? And also my second question is, are you going to create a video or some kind of presentation that parallels basically the content of your presentation today?
Oh, wow. Great questions. I'm glad you asked the first question because is Kenji Tagaman not here? The Nichibei News has just started a Films of Remembrance online program. So,
And there's flyers back here on the table.
Films of Remembrance. So, Rob Busher asked me to add Conscience in the Constitution. And in November, it'll be added in November because it's the 25th anniversary of its premiere on PBS in November 2000. So November will be available. But thank you for even remembering it. I appreciate that. Well, it was fun to make, and it was again with Eric's book and Shizu's film and Emiko's film, kind of ahead of its time.
Okay.
As for video, I'm so busy doing other stuff right now that I don't have time to do videos. But I mean, this video that's being recorded right now is my attempt to have an online resource available. I also put the contents of my April version of this talk online at my blog at resistors.com. So you go to my blog and search for, what JA incarceration means for mass deportation. I posted the text of my speech online because I got so much interest in it, so many requests, and I was happy to share it. Because it's just so strange to me to revisit the stuff we've done 25 years ago and in 2021 and kind of make these new connections to what's happening today and see how the connections are very strong. I mean, some Nisei or Sansei may think that we have, that it's too bad what's happening to the undocumented and the immigrant today, but the idea of deportation and self-deportation is actually part of our story too, with the Tule Lake renunciants. Unfortunately, the Tule Lake story and the renunciation story is one that is underreported, underserved in our own community, and has been for decades. And we're still, as we heard yesterday, still struggling with that story. So I was glad to be able to kind of attempt to untangle that or unpack that through the Hiroshi Kashiwagi story in our graphic novel. But the connections are still there. Yes.
Okay, we have a question back here with Greg.
Yeah, I wanted to build on what Frank talked about, to talk about two elements very important about how the Japanese American incarceration anticipates our current day question. One is about solidarity and allies. Norman Thomas, the Socialist Party leader, who was the only national political figure to oppose Executive Order 9066, said he never found an issue that was more difficult to attract the usual liberal and labor allies to oppose Executive Order 9066, mostly because it was the Roosevelt administration. And so we shouldn't underestimate the importance of pushing not just the government, but the usual suspects. Like the ACLU was a weak reed in opposing Executive Order 9066. There was a board member referendum organized by Morris Ernst, a Roosevelt crony, who to make Executive Order 9066 considered constitutional. That is, the ACLU would not oppose Executive Order 9066, but would rather only oppose the discriminatory application of Executive Order 9066 to Japanese Americans only, which fatally handicapped the ACLU lawyers in opposing Executive Order 9066. Morris Ernst. Norman Thomas, who was, by the way, financed by the JACL to write his pamphlet, Democracy in the Japanese Americans.
Wow.
Something that very few people know. When he organized a meeting of the Post-War World Council in New York to have a mass meeting against Executive Order 9066, Mike Masaoka was the guest speaker. And he said, if they can do it to us, they can do it to you too. An unusual action from Masaoka, which people don't know that much about. That same Morris Ernst, however, when the Supreme Court was considering the Hirabayashi case, wrote to Roosevelt that he had been tipped off by the Chief Justice that the court was likely to rule against the government because Morris Ernst had suggested a petition for human rights. And the Chief Justice had written that in view of what we're doing to the Japanese Americans, it's really kind of weird to be writing such a petition. So Ernst interpreted that the Supreme Court was going to rule against the government, and he wrote to Roosevelt saying, what should we do? And Roosevelt, not interested in obeying the court's orders, wrote back, we should make plans for a limited local martial law that could stick wherever we wanted it to. The point is that the government was not, the executive was not ready to obey the spirit of the court's order. They were going to get around it as any way they could, just as the army declared martial law in Hawaii and used it to crush the civil liberties of everybody. Both on the West Coast and in Hawaii, Executive Order 9066 and its counterpart in Hawaii can be considered as the effort of the military, Carl Bendetson, Colonel Thomas Green, and the others, to overcome civilian control of the military and give the military as much of a free hand as possible. And so what we need to understand for the current crisis is that this is an effort to impose military rule on civilians.
Thank you, Greg. Thanks very much.
Yeah, I thought I saw a hand up here. No? Okay, so just Grace.
And then Vanessa.
Yeah.
Grace.
Oh, Vanessa, you have a question too? I thought you said no. Oh, we'll go with Grace and then we'll do you.
Well, I don't have a question.
Oh,
I just wanted to,
make a comment.
Yeah.
Sure. We got time.
well, first of all, thank you very much. I love coming to your sessions. I just wanted to let folks know, you'll probably hear it later, but Tsuru is planning a demonstration, ICE out of Dublin for July 19th in Dublin. So if you're local, please
what's
come.
in Dublin?
They're planning to build a detention center there.
Really?
Yeah, they're taking over a women's prison that was closed because there was so much sexual abuse, and it looks like they're in the process of getting it ready. They fired all the people who are taking care of the buildings, so it's pretty imminent.
Yeah, and I guess to clarify, it's Dublin, California, right? So, just.
All right, thank you. I was wondering, Frank, thank you so much for your presentation. And then Hanako, for everything you've been pulled into for this gathering. But I'm just wondering, Frank, as you were pointing out, even with your presentation, like you've made this quite recently, but already there's changes, there's updates, there's new things that have happened. And I think for people today, where we have so many different ways to consume news, get information, it's hard to keep up. It's hard to know where to turn for trusted information. I'm just wondering if you have any sort of resources for where to turn to get information that isn't just, scrolling on your phone and being completely overwhelmed and then deciding that you're just going to lie face down on your bed, for the day. Especially because as we even see within our own community, like kind of as demonstrated in, yesterday's closing panel, there's deep issues of trust and fissures even within our own community as to where to turn to for a trusted resource, for advice, for guidance. And so I think, for myself being a Yonsei millennial, working parent sort of person, I'm also trying to be a leader in the community. It's kind of like is overwhelming, and knowing sort of where to turn to for trusted information or to get advice that you feel isn't going to spark somebody someplace else. It seems very fraught.
It is, and I too have suffered the same business of doom scrolling on my phone. And I think though that two places I've gone have been just for historical perspective. One is Timothy Snyder, posts on Blue Sky a lot, and Timothy Snyder is the author of a book called On Tyranny, very short, compact book, but it has 22 lessons about what to look for in terms of what are the warning signs of a growing authoritarianism. And of course, one of them is look out for the next Reichstag fire, or the next incident that will provoke clampdown by the authorities on democratic freedoms. So that's one resource I look to. The other is The Atlantic. I just find that The Atlantic, and they have a Facebook profile too. I drew the information about the ICE budget from an article in The Atlantic. And so it has that useful perspective. These are long reads. I don't have time to read all the whole articles, but there's a good information there, good perspective that I found calming. Yeah.
Thank you.
And just to let you guys know that we do have time for questions, so you don't have to feel shy if you're thinking we're running out of time, because the session goes until 10:30.
Hi. So I'm so glad, Frank, that you showed the post from Viet, because this is a question that I've posed to myself often about what I would have done if I had been alive during World War II, right, as a Chinese American. And I guess, so my question is really both for you and really for everyone in this room, how do we deal with fear? Because I feel like there are stances that I've taken publicly that I've written about. I'm on a watch. I am one of the people that is on a watch list.
I didn't mention your name. Not mention your name, Jennifer. Okay.
No, it's okay. I mean, it's public. You can look. And the things I've written are public, and it's not like I can scrub, and nor would I want to scrub the things that I've written, both scholarly and that are publicly engaged. And so I find myself really confronting fear, right? The fear of, which is why I'm not traveling internationally right now, the fear of being held by Customs and Border Protection, the fear of being detained by ICE, the fear that, despite the fact that I was born here and have a blue passport, that I have a Chinese surname, I have an Asian-looking face, right? And I feel like the fear is getting in the way of doing things like going to protests or standing up for people. And so I guess my question, so I've been really trying to think about this fear that I have and this anxiety and trying to make it right-sized. And friends of mine have said, like, Jennifer, you're not going to do anyone any good if you're in jail. And I know that, but I also don't know if that's really, like, do I really have to worry about being arrested? Like, it's really hard to know in the moment that we're in, right? Because I think 2 years ago, I would have thought that it was totally paranoid for me to have this fear. And now I'm not sure, because I think this is true for all of us, right? I mean, and I think this is what fascist authoritarianism wants, right? They want to make us afraid. And so I'm trying to really think through fear, but the problem is fear is emotional rather than logical. So I can try and there's only so much I can logic my way. And I guess I'm just looking for inspiration or advice for those of you who may have figured out a way to handle your fear better than the way that I'm grappling with mine. That's big. I get it.
Yeah, does anyone have any suggestions? You have a suggestion? Hold on, wait for the microphone. So, this is being recorded. This is being live streamed, by the way. So everyone's watching.
I don't know if this is helpful, but it's something I remember reading once a while back, where it said courage is not the about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what you know you need to do anyway. Doing what you've done, I would be afraid. And I just hope that when the time comes, I'm continuing to put one foot in front of another and know that obviously around here, there's a lot of like-minded people. That to me is quite inspiring, hearing the work that people here have done. It's been very helpful.
Okay, I saw a hand up here, and then I'll go
Suggestions?
back
Other
down this
suggestions? Grace, you have a suggestion? Wait for the microphone, Grace. Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
So after the election, I decided I didn't want to be in fear, that I did, because that's what they want, and that's their tactics. And we actually were in Japan at the time, and I thought, okay, two things I think are really important is community and humanity. And so when we got back, because we live on the Monterey Peninsula, I went and talked to somebody at church about getting a Stephen ministry training. That provided an instant community with other trainees, and they do supervision. And I thought, this is what I've needed to do. We have not been very involved at church. And then the other thing about the humanity is, I'm an occupational therapist and I have a practice, and to really try to see the humanity in all my patients, no matter what they believe, what they want to share. And I think along with what he was saying about, it's not about the absence of fear, because I think that during COVID, we had this online group at church, and they were saying, Kathy, you're not afraid walking around. And I had just read a thing on the JA Facebook page of this woman going to her hometown and how it was always safe. And then this lady is yelling at her to go back to, and then she lived in my town. And I'm like, I was walking to work, and I was like starting to look around me. I started driving because I got paranoid, and I thought, okay, stop this, just go back. And I was definitely paying attention. But then I also started to notice people seem to be going out of their way to say hello to me, people I didn't know. And I thought, okay, it's just kind of, and so I think that community and that humanity gives us somewhere else to be. The other thing is, I listened to Heather Cox Richardson. She's a historian from Boston College.
Very good one, yes.
And she gives you a really historical perspective where you go, oh, this happened before. And then she also gives you some concrete things you can do. And I think, and one of the things she's really focused on, she did a talk in Atlanta with the Democratic Women's Group. She said, look, somebody said, but we're all older. She said, this is the exact demographic that needs to lead. This is the group that votes more often, and they can get out there. And really, what they were saying is white women should lead this with all the people of color behind them. And so she's talking to that community, but it's just listening to her, for me, is very calming, because she's not, she doesn't get excited or anything. She just kind of lays these out and goes, here's some things you can do what you can. So that, for me, that's what helps.
I want to validate Heather Cox Richardson. She has like a daily email alert.
She's starting to do shorter little things. She has things like for an hour, hour and a half.
Yeah, she has videos too, yeah.
She's got somebody who's breaking them up into like little things and stuff. So she's really trying to kind of meet people where they're at. And she just did an interview with Obama.
Yeah.
Then she really kind of let him talk.
Yeah, but I want to add, she also has a daily email update, which is actually COX, yeah, Heather Cox Richardson. It's also a bit overwhelming. I subscribe to her daily emails, and she's always breaking down what's happening today with ICE raids and DOJ and this and that. And actually, it's very helpful but I actually find it's overwhelming also because it's like I can't keep up every day with what's happening, but she does. So if I need to look back on stuff, I can look back on that. So that's another good resource.
Yeah, and then she also has, I think, a Facebook page that you could like subscribe where she does stuff too. And oh,
After a month, they drop all the videos.
oh, okay. So she's saying that she's moving things over to YouTube. And I just want to make one comment before I give to Grace, is that when you're talking about like, this is like a white woman's thing or whatever, one of my friends told me about a meme that she saw, and she's a white woman, and she was saying, it just resonated with this, where she said, fascism is when white people get a dose of their medicine. And I just want to put that out there to let it sink in. But here you go, Grace.
Oh, honestly, I feel like I'm plugging Tudu. But I was just going to say one of the key components of Tudu is healing. And every action on big news, they really have procedures in place because this is a frightening place to be in, and especially as JAs, we have kind of like intergenerational trauma that might come up. So one of the things we do is we have ways to heal. We have healing circles. I wonder if Katie will talk a little bit more about some of them. No? Okay. But even if you don't live in an area where there are a lot of people, you can do so much online. And just go to our website.
I want to pick up on the idea of community that you mentioned. That I think that I think networking is also a very effective way to help feel not alone, because they want to divide us and feel alone. And this is Jennifer, I wanted to. I thought we discussed this at the Association for Asian American Studies conference in Boston in April. That I thought we were going to form networks there and a ready, rapid response team to go out and speak up if our members start getting picked up. And when that didn't happen, I went straight to Jennifer and we said, let's talk about how I can help you because I know you'll be among the first to go. And we exchanged, email addresses, and then if I can, your husband posted a Facebook profile so that if something happens to our friend here, I can go to his Facebook profile and find out what's happening. So I think supporting each other and being ready to, and knowing that there are people that you've met here at this conference this weekend that you can connect with and just stay in touch with, so that you can know that if something happens to you adversely, there will be people who will come to your aid, even just to speak up and post about it and just not be silent about it. I think that also very helpful. And then Eric, give Eric the microphone.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Eric.
So I just wanted to remind everybody that the gap in the United States House of Representatives is 3 seats, and that's not a lot of seats. Even in a gerrymandered world where there's not a lot of seats that are actually up for grabs, 3 seats is an attainable goal. So while we're talking about all of the kind of grassroots things that we're doing, that we want to do, perhaps that we're afraid of doing, I think we should remember that a major lever could be thrown that would significantly slow down, not prevent, but slow down the worst excesses of this administration, and that is to put at least one of the houses of Congress in the hands of the opposing party. Similarly, we've seen Republicans be very, very effective at preventing Democrats from getting their court appointees confirmed. We are not at the moment seeing a comparable effort by Senate Democrats to block Republican court appointees. So I guess I want us to remember that not everything that we can do is necessarily right in our backyards. We can also do things, even if it just means donating financially to political campaigns, and pressuring public officials to show backbone. I think that's another very important piece of this puzzle.
Okay, so back over here. Well, before you speak, I want to also, leadership is also very important. And by leadership, I mean simple things like, I mean, sharing my talk online, people were looking to me as like kind of a source of inspiration and hope and, some kind of promise. In Seattle, February 19th, we had a day of remembrance that was canceled because the Pike Place Market Foundation chickened out. This is right after the inauguration, right? They've been working with our local DOR group for a day of remembrance and resistance. That's right. And they got panicked by the idea of the resistance part of that because they feared that they would lose their federal funding for their food programs at the Pike Place Market. And so they kind of canceled the DOR program at the Pike Place Market. And I was really shocked that this is happening across the nation, but we thought Seattle was a bastion of a blue state. And so I just posted about it on Facebook, and I got so much response from other friends saying thank you for sharing this, and Jeff Yang said thanks for standing up for us. And I'm just sharing the information about what's happening, and pointing out that we did not want to comply in advance, and just by talking about compliance in advance and the dangers of that as being one of the hallmarks of tyranny and submission to tyranny. That was a bit of leadership that was welcomed at that moment. Real leadership, however, also means going to court. And I mentioned, I think, that Eric Mueller had filed a brief in one of those fifth district circuit against the Alien Enemies Act. Also, JACL. I was very impressed with JACL and David Noe for stepping up and leading this coalition that filed suit against the misuse of the Alien Enemies Act currently. And I posted on Facebook that, look at this. The JCL has redeemed 80 years of history, and by actually doing something, showing leadership by taking this action. And that was, a little joke.
Just to clarify.
Yes, sir.
Mm.
Oh. Thank you. Okay. And so there's so many lawsuits are flying.
Actually, along the lines of amicus, so these MEP were actually at the appellate level. We're anticipating it's going to be filed with the Supreme Court later this year. And
so we're anticipating this Alien Enemies Act case is going to go to the Supreme Court at some point. We filed these amici at the appellate level, but we are working on one more amicus brief, which is focused on survivors. So if any of you, or descendants, so if any of you might be a descendant of someone who was rounded up under the auspices of the Alien Enemies Act, we are looking for people to sign on to that brief, which will be obviously coming forth later in the year. So get in touch with me or Naoko Fuji, who has been really organizing all this on behalf of JCL.
And so thank you, David, for that leadership on that as well.
Yeah, I guess I did want to say something about Jennifer's question around fear. Just from the comments that we heard earlier, there's a huge legal component to this, and I'm not saying the legal protections always protect you. We know that those get overridden, especially recently, but I do think there is something about knowing your rights as a citizen, as someone who lives in this country. There's a reason that when people go out to protest that they write numbers on their bodies. Those are usually numbers for legal protection when they get thrown into jail. So that, I don't know if it serves as a source of comfort, but certainly when you're emboldened, or you can become emboldened when you have education around the legal system. So that's one thing, and there's a lot of resources. I don't have any on the top of my head, but knowing those protections can make you feel more comfortable speaking out, so that you know like that you have First Amendment rights and you have these certain things, especially as a writer. So that's one thing I wanted to say. The other thing I did want to say is I also don't want us to lose sight that We had mass deportation under Democratic administrations as well. That's not to say it's the same level. I don't want to misconstrue that it's at in any form the same level. So I do think it's important, like Eric said, to be looking at these kind of federal, like bigger federal and state legislations. But it takes multiple strategies. I think is at the end of the day is what we're talking about. Yeah.
So I think maybe one more question.
Yeah, we could do one more question to wrap this up. Stan?
Well, this is actually in response to Jennifer's question about security. So in Suited for Solidarity, we say that we're a direct action organization. So concerns for security are kind of become a lot more important in the last 3 or 4 months. But so preparedness is really important. So like know your rights, know what your legal rights really are. No guarantee that the police or the National Guard will respect those, but at least you know what you're entitled to as a U.S. citizen. And if you're not a U.S. citizen, then I think this is a time where you need to be really careful, and people around you need to be really careful about what they ask you to do or what they encourage you to do. I think it's really important not to just be by yourself, that join an organization or connect with a network where people, if something should happen, you get stopped at the airport and taken over by ICE to the basement. That someone will know that that's happening, that there will be people who will, maybe rush to the airport to protest, that you have access to a lawyer or someone who knows a lawyer who can respond. So that's a lot easier to do in a group than as individuals. So I would really encourage people to do that and just be, if you're doing a planned civil disobedience where, you contact the police and say, okay, we're going to be doing a sit down at the senator's office at 9 a.m. tomorrow, it's a lot more controlled. But if it's like in LA where 10,000 people are in the street in front of City Hall and then the National Guard come in and, that's a lot more chaotic. So it's still really important to be in groups and not individual running around like, no one knows where I am and in the plaza and stuff. So just common sense and there's ways to prepare for the unexpected. So folks should start doing that.
This is really silly, but my driver's license from Washington State is not yet Real ID compliant. So I realized I didn't have any papers to show the Gestapo when they asked for my papers. So I've taken to carrying my passport card with me as my proof of citizenship in the U.S. So that's silly.
So it's funny, I do that too.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
okay.
Yeah, I carry my passport card with me just in case. But I just kind of want to follow
Papers.
up on
Let's see your papers. Oh, yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So I do want to follow up on one thing of what Stan was saying. It's like, be part of someone else's support system. So we had an issue that came up at the Japanese American Museum of Oregon, which we normally don't, do like these like casework stuff. But we had an individual who's a hibakusha. So she survived the bombing at Hiroshima, who lives in Medford. And then she got a letter from ICE saying she needs to report to ICE. Because at first I thought she had to go to the consulate. And she's like, no, ICE is calling me. And she's, in her 90s. I think she's 95. And she's just all like, I don't know if I'm going to get deported. And she's in a wheelchair. And what ended up happening was they just needed an updated photo, but it freaked her out. But she had her friend who happens to be in their 70s driving her. And so she's also worried because she's like, I don't know what to do. But they came to our museum just to kill some time beforehand. And there's a documentary that's going to be made about her. So some of the documentarians were there and they happened to be white men. So I was like, you guys need to follow her and go in with her. And if something happens, then give me a call because I know some attorneys. And just having that conversation with Hideko and the folks there helped her feel more comfortable going in. And then I got the text saying, oh, they just need updated paperwork. But it kind of goes back to that fear where the government isn't really communicating adequately of like what their needs are and making this like 90-year-old woman drive like I think it was like 2 or 3 hours up to Portland just for an updated photo, but she was actually in fear that she will never go home. So just being part of smaller support systems, any little thing kind of helps, I think. And then, okay, we got one last comment or question, and then we'll close out.
I just wanted to say that Hanako's remark really reminds me of the fact that it really could be anyone at any time called upon to be an ally. Amazing that you acted so quickly and on the spot. I personally was called the other day by a friend who's a friend of my son. She went to one of the protests and was arrested. And I happen to be a lawyer and I work for the government, so I can't, the state government. So I can't represent her, but I'm honored to go to her hearings with her and take part in handling the 500 cases that have 45 days to come to trial because of the don't waive your right to a speedy trial ever. But it's just a reminder, like you never know when someone could ask you to help them, and just be ready. Be ready and be willing to put yourself out there however you can, because everyone has a skill that can help. You don't have to be a lawyer. Anyone can be smart like Hanako and aware and prepared.
Thanks, Karen. Frank, do you have any last words or anything?
Thanks for coming. I think
Okay.
I wanted this to be a time for us to kind of share information and share community. So yeah.